True to form, the out-of-touch Liberal government has repackaged their horrible green agenda, calling it the climate competitive strategy. They want you to think that somehow this time it's going to be different. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. The Liberal government quietly released a statement from the Secretary of State Vancouver on how the climate strategy is brand new. Now, I've had a quick look at the statement, and I can tell you that not only is the climate strategy out of date and no longer valid for the world in which we live, it is also just the same thing that they've been telling us for 11 years, except this time they think because they've changed the name, somehow that's going to change the devastation, the impact that it's having on the economy. And it was fine and dandy for them to try to convince you that everything was going to go in the green agenda until the American market became closed to the entire world, or not closed so much as more expensive to access, which of course resulted in much of our industry going into the south of the border. I mean, for most of these corporations, it's only a small couple of 100 kilometers. And then they can set up shop just over the border in the United States of America and benefit from all sorts of improvements in their corporate lifestyle. Meaning, lower taxes, no environmental oversight. There's environmental oversight, just not the kind of zealotry and the lunacy that you see coming out of the Liberal government and the far left supporters of the Liberal government who can't see the woods for the trees, pun intended. Now, we're going to talk about how not only is the Liberal strategy designed to distract from the horrible budget yet again, we'll go over how the rest of the planet simply doesn't agree with the Liberal government, and they are all going full bore on the old style of getting gas into their system, getting oil into their system. Wind is going off to the side. Solar panels were never going to be a hit. I mean, they've been around since the 60s. Nobody has been interested in them beyond putting little ones when you might go camping or something. All right, let's check it out. As we dive into this, I'd just like to point out a couple of things. This statement was released on a Sunday, and I'm sure that has a lot to do with the Liberal government hoping that they can distract you in the constituency week because no one's sitting in the House of Commons this upcoming week at time of recording. The mainstream media and the Liberal government have been trying to push this narrative about Pierre Poilievre, which nobody believes. Nobody that supports the Conservatives believes anyway. So that didn't work. So now they got to try to distract you from the budget with this, how it's all going to be about the environment, because that is something that gets their inner city base all foaming at the mouth. The other point I'd like to make is this statement was released, and it's just repackaging of the same terms. It's got the term catalyze in it, for example. It was released by Canadian Heritage, and Secretary Vancouver is part of the sport. So he's Secretary of State for Sport. Now, I'm not sure how that impacts the economy or the environment, and yet this is the man releasing the statement. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will read one segment of it. Today, the Honorable Adam Vancouver, Secretary of State for Sport, echoed the announcement highlighting Canada's climate competitive strategy, which is just the same thing it's always been. It's a crackdown on anybody that wants to do business in this world, in this country anyway. A strategy based on driving investment and achieving results, which it will do neither. Building on Canada's competitive advantages, which they have destroyed, and global standing as a clean energy superpower. There is no such thing as clean energy superpower. The strategy will strengthen our economy by strengthening industrial carbon pricing. So you can see that there was never any desire to take away. They want you to, what I don't understand is who do they give this money to? Where is it that we can pay money to the planet and that's somehow going to make it green again? This goes right into their pockets, which is, looks like a grift or a scam, in my opinion. Providing clarity on regulations to reduce greenhouse gases, admitting that the regulations are so convoluted nobody wants to invest in them because they make no sense. Boosting clean economy investment through tax credits. Again, it's not the tax credits. You can always get those. It's the regulations that they don't want, that people don't want, especially if they just go down 100 kilometers. They can invest as they like and nobody is there with the foolishness. Supporting critical minerals projects, of course you are, though the American government has already purchased big sections of our critical minerals through the stock market, so that's going to be a little bit tricky. Mobilizing capital for transition to net zero, not even sure what that means. Going to raise money for our transition to net zero while you tell the world that Canada is not open for business and all of the things that we do have that the world demands, which I'll show you in a minute. Canada is refusing to sell or get out of the ground or any of the things that go along with producing it. Deploying new metrics to track our success. I don't want to hear how you might have saved this much percentage of greenhouse gases because it doesn't matter. Our market is so small that if you were to save 100% of the greenhouse gases we got going on in this country, it wouldn't even compare to 2 days of what they crank out in China. Now, I'm going to show you how there's all kinds of things that are going on in the world around us that you might not be hearing from the corporate media, but it's true nonetheless, and how it goes completely against the narrative of the Liberal government. We're going to pull a couple of things out of an article from the Fraser Institute, which is a think tank that looks at these things with impartiality. Emissions regulations harm Canada in exchange for no environmental benefit. I'm not surprised. The Carney government recently announced changes to the clean fuel regulation, signaling stricter carbon content rules for gasoline and diesel, though few details were provided. The budget has provided some of those details. According to the recent study by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the CFR, the Clean Fuel Regulation, is expected to increase fuel prices by 17 cents a liter for gasoline and 16 cents a liter for diesel by 2030, so not that far away at all. These costs will be added on top of the already high policy-driven fuel costs. In 2023, for example, the average price of gasoline in Canada was $1.57.3 per liter. If you're American out there, appreciate that would be $6 a gallon. That would be nearly six. Like there's 3.8 liters per gallon. So just say 4, basically. So $1.50 times 4 is $6, compared to just $1.29 per liter in the United States in 2023. Now we know it's the national average is $3 a gallon, so 80 cents, 75, 80 cents. California throws it off back and forth. A 21% difference, mainly the result of fuel taxes in Canada. 21%, not 21 cents, it's 21%, meaning almost a quarter higher, 20% higher. All of that going into the pocket of the Liberal government so they can waste it in Ukraine, so they can waste it on their private jets, so they can waste it on they can waste it. They can pay it off to all the money they're borrowing that we shouldn't have to be borrowing. The article goes on to talk about how they feel, the PBO feels that it'll cost approximately $9 billion by the time we hit 2030. That's coming out of the pockets of me and you. Roughly $600 in gas prices alone per person. It'll depend on what area, of course, that you're living in. And this is a horrible way to try and develop the budget because it doesn't punish corporations like they're trying to claim. It punishes me and you. It says that we don't have the right to drive. It says that we don't have the right to affordable food. I mean, if you're looking at taking this money off of people, farmers should be exempt, 100% exemption. People that transport anything essential, and if you don't think food's essential, then I ask you to go hungry for a couple of days and tell me if you feel the same thing at the end of 48 hours. Anything that's essential shouldn't be off limits to the federal government's taxations. This report from the Fraser Institute is very bad on the green agenda. Ottawa and the 4 biggest provinces have spent or foregone in revenues, meaning that they have, by their own green policy, said that we won't get that revenue. At least $158 billion to create at most 68,000 jobs since 2014. They might try to convince you that 68,000 jobs is a lot. Meaning the Liberal government and the zealots and the green agenda and the green movement. But Donald Trump's actions have already cost us nearly 200,000 jobs. Shutting down the pipeline in Alberta, just running to the BC coast, is closing approximately 30,000 jobs. And shutting down the pipeline in general into the other ones that were going to be running across to the eastern side of the country, approximately 180,000 jobs. So 60,000 jobs is nothing. And you can be sure that most of those are going to be bureaucratic jobs, just people in offices. So how does that generate or stimulate the economy or improve the environment when those offices are running with the heater or the AC going all day long, never turn the lights off. I mean, we talk about, if you want me to believe that if the Liberal government wants me to believe that a house violates the green agenda, then by very extension, a gigantic house or an office building must just destroy if we compare one to the other. Now, the state of the green economy, I'm just going to read a couple things out of here. The fiscal cost of Canada's low carbon economy. Overall, the combined cost of spending and tax credits supporting the low carbon economy by the federal government and the 4 provincial governments is estimated at $143.6 billion in 10 years. In nominal terms, that's adjusted for inflation. The total reaches $158 billion in whatever money was worth in 2024. Of course, it's much higher because the strength of our dollar is much weaker. And right now, we are nowhere near the strength we were even just 2 or 3 years ago, because the borrowing without having anything coming back impacts the strength of our dollar, which means that, like I've told all of you, a small adjustment in these interest rates from the money lenders translates into enormous amounts of money. Canada's various environmental and clean technology industries collectively have accounted for between 3.07 and 3.62% of all industry GDP over the 10-year period. While it has grown, the sector as a whole has not been expanding at the pace that mainly exceeds the growth of the overall Canadian economy, despite the significant policy attention and mounting public subsidies. All of that is to say that it's not working. The clean economy represents a respectable and relatively stable share of Canada's $3.3 trillion economy. However, it remains a small part of the Canadian broader industrial mix and is not a major source of export earnings. So there's no superpower. It can't export it. And it's not about to supplant the many other industries that underpin the country's prosperity and dominate its international exports. $160 billion they've thrown down the drain to create not even 70,000 jobs, and it has a negligible impact on the overall GDP of this country, as well as having a negligible impact on the industrial strength of this country and anything that we might be offering as exports to other countries. Doesn't work. It's not going to work this time. It hasn't worked so far. And with Donald Trump and much of the world turning away from it because they have realized it's not going to work, we are now throwing good money after bad. And the Liberal government, whether it be for their own personal reasons or whether it be because they're they're zealots and can't see the woods for the trees, does not care that the impact it's having on you, does not care that it's costing us so much money. Your great-grandchildren are going to have to be paying it back, and it will take 2 generations for anybody who's not in the upper crust 1% elites to even see the light of day. All right, let's take a look at whether or not the world agrees with the Liberal government and the propaganda arm of the Liberal government and all their corporate friends on how Canada is going to be leading the way because the rest of the world is going green. U.S. shale producer EOG Resources beats third quarter profit estimates. So shale is an oil, it's a fossil fuel. The company received a production boost from its $5.6 billion deal for NCO Acquisition Partners, which is just somebody taking money, and it's like a Brookfield or a BlackRock, which helped expand EOG's presence in Utica and Marcellus region, one of the most prolific natural gas basins in the world. So it's so off kilter that another one of these massive companies like Brookfield have come in with $5.6 billion so they can invest in a natural gas field, a thing that we have more than anywhere on earth, natural gas. Of course, that's one of the things that the Liberal government refuses to develop, or refuses to allow Alberta to develop, EOG said it produced 1.3 million barrels of oil equivalent per day, which rose from 1.08 million barrels per day a year earlier. So if we were to lay that number out, that would be 1,080,000 last year, and now it's 1,300,000 this year. In the span of 12 months, they've increased their production that many barrels for every single day. And yet the Carney government tells us there's no market for it. I find that there's a lot there that doesn't make any sense. But I know that somebody thinks there's a market that they can buy a little bit in for $5.6 billion. I mentioned LNG, and of course we've been pushing LNG. The Conservatives have been pushing LNG, and the Liberal government has been adamantly against anything that makes prosperity for Canadians. I mean, they don't mind being prosperous themselves. They just don't want you to be prosperous. I mean, that's how it looks. U.S. LNG producer Inc. near record contract volume, even as fees climb. So they know they're paying more to sign the deal, and they're doing it anyway because there is just that kind of money in the deal. U.S. liquefied natural gas developers are on track this year to ink the second highest annual number of binding sales contracts, despite industry concerns about increasing capacity and rising costs. In the first 10 months of 2025, U.S. LNG producers signed sales and purchase agreements for 29.5 million metric tons of LNG, more than 4 times what it was in 2024. In 1 year, it's gone up 4 times because the Biden administration got out of the way. Donald Trump said, let's not be so quick to judge and let's get this natural gas out of the ground. People like the natural gas. It cleans a little cleaner. It burns a little cleaner, and we got lots of it. So let's send it into Asia. Let's send it into different parts of the world, and we'll be making all kinds of money hand over fist. Of course, Canada could also be part of that. But we have the Liberal government and people that thought that if they voted Mark Carney, somehow their life were going to be improved. And let's be straightforward, there's no way in the world your life is going to be improved. And it has not been improved. 4 times in 1 calendar year. But the mainstream media and Mark Carney wants you to believe there's no market. And somehow he's going to give you an economy that's bigger than what the Americans are doing. And he's going to be doing it without getting any LNG into the system or any oil and gas into the system. Now, to take it all and put it into one little, tie a nice little bow around it, U.S. set to produce record amounts of natural gas to meet surging export demand, meaning that there is a lot of countries around the world that will take every last metric cubic ton of it that you can bring them. Surging export demand. U.S. energy firms produced a record amount of natural gas during the third quarter as producers scrambled to keep up with the soaring domestic and export demand for the fuel. Power-hungry data centers and a boom in liquefied natural gas exports is driving up the U.S. gas use, pushing producers to pull more gas out of the ground. Both supply and demand are set to hit record highs in 2025 and 2026. Data centers, liquid natural gas, the whole world wants it. How can we improve the lives of people in the third world and in the global south? Well, one of the biggest ways we can improve their lives is to send them liquid natural gas so that they can, electrify their country, as an example. But the world is demanding it so much that the Americans are going to be setting records for the amount of production and the amount that they have exported. I don't see Mark Carney even getting close to that because he is a zealot who's making a lot of money in his other companies on this liquid natural gas. He just doesn't want you to make a penny. He doesn't want you to make anything. He doesn't mind making money. Him and his, front bench, they love it. But me and you, no. We got to pay extra, pay. Now you might be thinking, yeah, but Sterling, that doesn't mean that the other energy sectors are not going just the same full bore and doing really well. All right, let's have a look at that. Offshore wind leaders urge European policy fixes as Trump freezes U.S. permits because wind is horrible and everybody knows it. Not only is it horrible on the environment, it's horrible for its cost. Like every one of those turbines has a diesel engine in it that starts it up, and every one of them is a bird graveyard at the bottom of it. And every one of them, there's nothing that can live under it in the way of grass and all of the rest of that. Now, there might be a way to incorporate some wind that I have in my head, but these gigantic monolithic things are not the answer. And we know that now. We've had lots of time to look at it. So Donald Trump says no more. And I wish that we had a government who was willing to listen to the reality, the facts on the ground, so that we can actually make improvements instead of just spinning our wheels and going broken more and more into the third world, into the collapsed economy with every passing second. There's one thing out of here that I want to take that I find to be significant to the story that I'm telling. Several European countries, including Denmark, Britain, Germany, and the Netherlands, have failed to attract bidders in recent years when auctioning offshore wind permits as developers balked at the lack of subsidies or revenue guarantees to offset the rising cost of financial challenges. They can't get any investment. Nobody's going to say to themselves, well, let me pay the government $1 million. I mean, just throwing numbers out random. Let me pay them $1 million so that I can have exclusive right to put wind turbines in offshore of Britain, for example, and hope that I make $1.5 million or whatever it happens to be. Again, just random numbers, but that's the idea. They're going to put these the rights to put your company there up for auction, and nobody is showing up to bid on them because they know that the policies, that the legislation that the governments have in place will not gain them any money. And remember, it's not ideologically driven in the corporate world. It is, unless the ideology is let's make some money for not only ourselves but for our shareholders. Remember that they don't want to look bad. They don't want to be these businessmen that couldn't turn a profit, like Mark Carney, who had to run away from England after he essentially destroyed their economy. And now he's in Canada hiding out from his friends in Europe, which is why he desperately why he tries so often to go there, not sealing any deals. However, that changes nothing. What matters is that nobody is purchasing the wind in Europe, despite the fact that the Europeans and the Canadian government are all trying to tell you that they are. The reality on the ground is Germany is one of the countries that is begging for every last drop of LNG they can get their hands on, except for when they came to the Canadian government, the ethical Canadian government, the Canadian government through Quebec shot them down. So now they buy their oil from Qatar, I think, the UAE, or it might be Saudi Arabia. I forget. Either way, they're buying it from one of the Middle Eastern countries who's only too happy to supply them with every last little tiny drop that they can get their hands on, as well as they are buying some from Norway, who, for all of the liberal governments talk about Norway having electric vehicles, produces some of the most, they're like the third or the fourth world's largest producer of these oil and gas industries, because they did not tell themselves that there was no money in it. They did not tell themselves that they are ideologically opposed to it. And as a result, they have developed all kinds of offshore oil and natural gas deposits, as well as carbon capture. So they're making it hand over fist, which is, of course, something that Canadians would be very beneficial to be doing, except, of course, again, we come back to the same old problem. The Liberal government, 9 laws that they have enacted, and how they themselves fly jets and have chauffeur-driven SUVs, and they are expecting you to go rollerblading in the wintertime with your groceries and your kids, picking them up from daycare and all the rest of that. Clearly, the Liberal government is out of touch with what Canadians need, and clearly the Liberal government's policies of how they've changed it to the clean climate strategy is not having anywhere near the reality that is going on around the planet. The American government is setting records in LNG, and they just got started. So imagine what it's going to be come 2028, 2029, when the countries that want to buy it have developed enough to utilize more and more and more and more and more of it. Of course, the Canadian government and the Canadian people will be behind for lack of vision, lack of developmental business savvy, and for lack of caring about what happens to the people as a whole, rather than being compartmentalized by somehow 28 people that live on the coast of British Columbia have the right to stop millions of people from making a little bit of money and having a decent job, a career, a future, and all the rest of the things that go along with that. And that's the state of the situation when it comes to the economy and the environment we have in this country. Of course, we have to be looking after that. None of that is going to be changed by this clean carbon initiative or whatever it is that the Liberal government tried to quietly release on a Sunday. so that they could get geared up for trying to tell you that it's all about the environment in an effort to distract you from the horrible budget, their horrible policies, and how everything that they are claiming is going to be different this time is no different than the last time, the time before, the time before. All of these policies have failed, except of course the big difference is they no longer have Biden, they no longer have the British, they only really have China, which is not a country that we need to be getting involved with, when we could be developing these processes and these projects on our own and making our country strong, putting Canada first, putting people in Canada ahead of the rest of the planet so that we can develop these projects, so that we can develop these products and send them off to these countries with the ethical oversight that the Liberal government seems to be so obsessed about, except for they won't do anything to implement them. And I come back to my original point. I don't believe there's anything in this legislation that is going to change the foolishness that we've seen up to now. I don't believe that there's anybody in the Liberal bench that is going to have the reason or the rationale to meet us halfway, to understand that their policies, though admirable, are not functional, and that the rest of the planet has seen that and has moved on from the Paris Accords and has moved on from all these copped things that are going on, and that Canadians deserve government and Canadians deserve leadership that is not going to put us in generational debt, that is actually going to develop our regions, that is going to offset the jobs that are being lost to the trade changes that the United States has put on. And that's what we need from our government. We need leadership. We need people to see the problem for what it is and to fix it. Not to say, oh, we're going to dream in some delusional fantasy fan land, and if you're going to go hungry, don't worry about it because we got a bunch of crickets we can send your way with a drone in your high density. Don't look over here because I have just installed my 4th air conditioner. I needed it for my garage because I can't let my cars get cold if I have to get one of my chauffeurs to pull it out in the middle of January. That's just my opinion. You can let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.